Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
I'm Elaine Cha. Crime, a search for the next police chief, traffic violence, and how to spend ARPA funds. Those are just a few top issues in St. Louis, and here to talk about that and much more, and not necessarily in that order, is St. Louis Mayor TIshaura Jones. Mayor Jones, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. So let's start with something that is very recent from this past week. There was a town hall meeting Tuesday night with the 4 finalists for the next chief of police. The finalists are Wilmington, Delaware, Police Chief Robert Tracy, former Norfolk, Virginia Police Chief Larry Boone, Columbia, South Carolina Deputy Chief Malvern Kelly, and interim St. Louis Police Chief Michael Sack. Who impressed you the most that night?
Well, I'd be telling you too much information if I told you who impressed me the most. I would say that each of them brought something different to the table, depending on where they came from and their respective experience. We had, Deputy Chief Kelly, who's from Columbia, South Carolina, who rose through the ranks, as well as Chief Larry Boone at Norfolk, Virginia, who also rose through the ranks. And both are Black men coming from majority minority cities. And then you have Chief Robert Tracy, also coming from Wilmington, Delaware, from a majority minority city, who has increased recruitment of minority police officers during his term. And then Chief Sack, who's been guiding our ship since the retirement of Chief Hayden. All of them have a wealth of experience, and all of them bring something different to the table.
So it sounds like you're confident that these are well-qualified candidates for the position.
Absolutely. Our search firm, the Bulwark Group, searched high and low to find these candidates, but with really specific instructions, because we wanted to make sure that the finalists also were rooted in community policing, alternatives to policing, as well as using data-driven policing strategies, and all of them met that mark.
So you've said that your intent is to make an announcement on who is selected for the job before the end of the year. What are the top qualities that you are looking for in this next police chief?
Well, as I just said, we want to make sure that they are rooted in community policing, that they have experience with alternative policing strategies, deploying the right professional to the right call, using data-driven policing strategies, using data to also determine our deployment strategies as well, and experience with dealing with minority communities. St. Louis is a majority minority town, and we want to make sure that the next chief also has cultural competence at the head, and also really lives diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So of the things that you have just mentioned, among the criteria and qualifications, we see that in 21st century policing methods is one of those things that is articulated. So you talked about data-driven policing. Would you say that that is an example of what differentiates 21st century from 20th century policing methods? Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, definitely. We have a lot of access to different technology nowadays. A lot of cities use ShotSpotter in different ways to tell when shots are being fired in different neighborhoods. And currently, even at our local police department, we use data to determine how to deploy our traffic violation officers to where the data tells us. Mm-hmm. The data also tells us, which neighborhoods are more violent than others and where to deploy different strategies. So that's all a part of 21st century policing.
You also mentioned community and being able to connect. Do you believe the public has had sufficient opportunity to offer input on the search for the new police chief?
Yes, absolutely. Before we had the interviews, we did town halls and had public surveys asking people what they wanted to see in their next police chief. We did online and paper surveys and town halls. And when we got the names from the personnel department, we released them. We got the names on a Friday. We released them on Monday, which was as soon as we could. But we have to remember this is a hiring process. So, the personnel department gave us the information, and we were able to disseminate it as soon as possible.
And what is your sense of how community members feel about the forum that happened on Tuesday night? Do you think that they were able to glean some valuable information in that one space and that one time?
Yes, absolutely. We appreciate everybody's participation in the town hall. We had over 1,300 people joining us online, or at least viewing the video that's still up on our website. We also got tons of comment cards, and I've been reading through the comment cards to see what people liked about the candidates, what they didn't like, and we're taking all of that into account as we make a decision.
Your current in this city, the current interim police chief, Michael Sack, is a finalist and the only local candidate for the job. What is your level of confidence in him for the time remaining, and what has he shown in the time that he has served in that capacity?
Chief Sack has done a tremendous job, especially dealing with the school shooting that we had on October 24th, exhibiting a wealth of compassion, as well as leading our officers to respond quickly, to be able to take the shooter out as soon as possible. And our officers, who are also dealing with, the trauma after this incident, responded perfectly. So, our officers were trained and ready, as well as the staff and officers in the school were trained and ready to respond.
Okay. Something that is associated with police, we received a tweet from someone who was wondering about an investigation into private policing, and we talked with Jeremy Kohler earlier this week. Is there anything that has been taken up in terms of city review of private companies that are employing police officers to do that work?
Well, we recently learned that the city does private policing, or what we call secondary, different than any other place in the country. And I don't want St. Louis to be unique in that way. So we are looking into ways to improve that, and also making sure that policing is fair in our city, that, the well-heeled few, or those who pay extra taxes, shouldn't get extra protection, that, we all pay taxes in order to make sure that we get equal protection from our police department.
So we do need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to pick up on this conversation with you, St. Louis Mayor TIshaura Jones. Now back to our conversation with St. Louis Mayor TIshaura Jones. I'd like to pick this up with some news that we've gotten. So we're going to talk about something that we have been waiting to hear a little bit about. That's guaranteed basic income. So last month, Alderwoman Shamim Clark-Hubbard introduced a measure to put $5 million of COVID relief funds to set up a universal basic income. That measure doesn't represent a first, as the city enacted a similar program in 2021 that used federal pandemic money to give more than 9,000 low-income households one-time $500 checks. An update just came in. What is that update?
That update is the HUD's committee passed the bill that included that funding with a do-pass recommendation out of committee, so it's on its way to the full board.
So this is now advanced. Let's talk about some of the details with this. Now, when it comes to an amount that does get dispersed, how much money are we talking about?
Yeah, so this particular program, we're talking about $500 to approximately 400 plus families over the next 18 months.
And is this program one that is sustainable after that point?
Well, it's a pilot. And it's similar to several cities across the country that have been using ARPA funds in the same way. St. Paul, Minnesota, Chicago, Illinois, to name a couple. And I am also part of Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, which is a coalition of about 100 mayors across the country who are doing pilot programs similar to this, because we know that ARPA funds won't last forever. So a lot of cities are choosing to use ARPA funds in this way.
What are those cities seeing as far as results go?
Well, we all go back to, everything points back to Stockton, California, and former Mayor Michael Tubbs, who did the first GBI pilot. And that showed that people use this money to stop working 2 jobs, for example, to take care of their family, to pay their rent, to get better paying jobs, to increase the station of themselves and their families, to buy food, to, groceries, clothes for their family, to move up. And we're finding that overall, families use this money to get out of poverty.
Do you happen to have an anecdote that illustrates how, during the 2021 disbursement, how that cash assistance actually helped people?
Yes, absolutely. We know from the data that we collected that most families use the money for groceries and to pay their utility bills. We have families that have come to us individually that told us that, there was one woman who used the money to get a new coat, for example, because the money was dispersed in the winter months. We know of another family who used the money to take care of her mother. She was unemployed, and she used it to be able to stay home and take care of her mother and buy the essentials there. So we know that people are using the money in the right way, and the way it was used, which is to help people get through these tough times. Because unless anybody's. My science tells me that we are still in the middle of a pandemic. We have not yet emerged, and we still have the flu to deal with and RSV. So there are still a lot of families who are still in need.
And much of that need does have to do with money. So let's talk a bit about the ARPA funds. Mm-hmm. The city of St. Louis received $498 million in the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. Mm-hmm. And according to the city's portal, about $135 million of that has been appropriated, but only $18.5 million spent. And that's gone unchanged for most of the year, with well over $350 million left to spend from this money. What are your priorities with it?
Well, I'd also like to challenge that we have about $80 million programmed out of that $135 million number that you talked about. And programmed means that it's out in the community currently being spent. And we're spending this in a myriad of ways under the rules and regulations of the American Rescue Plan Act. We have several tens of millions going towards infrastructure. We just allocated $40 million for a traffic and mobility study to make sure that no matter how people get around the city, that they are safe. We are spending money on expanding youth jobs, so that takes time. We're also spending money, like I said, in a myriad of ways, but this is money that has federal rules and regulations attached to it. So we want to make sure that we're dotting every I and crossing every T, because we don't want the federal government to enact any clawbacks on the money that we spend.
So last Friday, we did have some folks in to our show who were talking about homeless services. So we heard from several homeless service providers who told us that the city is not prepared to adequately shelter its homeless population this winter. Your office has said that vulnerable residents can now access more than 600 shelter beds, including 130 overflow beds. The people that we spoke with, however, said that they have no idea where these beds are and that there's no way to find out. And even more specifically, that operators at the 211 phone-based service don't have that information. For outreach providers working directly with homeless residents, if they don't know where these beds are, how are people who need them expected to find those beds?
Well, that's not true. 211 has information on where the beds are, as well as the Get Help app. And our department directors and staff have access to the Get Help app that shows where all of the beds are. And I want to stress that we are changing the way that we are approaching our unhoused in the city of St. Louis. We're requiring all shelter operators, including overflow shelters, to be open 24/7 and offer wraparound services, because we want our commitment is to making sure that our unhoused neighbors get into permanent and supportive housing so they don't end up homeless again. Also, we're providing data support to ensure that our unhoused neighbors and their needs are accounted for at city-funded and volunteer shelters. So we want to see the data that makes sure that we are giving our unhoused neighbors what they need, not just to survive the winter, but also to thrive after the winter is over.
So clearly there are macro-level issues that you are thinking about and wanting to deal with. But given that the winter season it's upon us each day. I mean, the weather it is erratic, but it is certainly getting colder.
Right.
One of the things that was brought up had to do with the warming bus, and so St. Patrick's Center CEO Anthony D'Agostino told us that his organization offered to run a warming bus for the city, and then he said that the city didn't take up the offer. Why is that?
Because having shelters 24/7 removes the need for a warming bus. If shelters are open 24/7, then our unhoused neighbors don't have to leave the shelter. They can stay there for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we've so it relieves the burden on our paid volunteer and outreach teams, and it negates the need for the warming bus.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of how unhoused residents would get to the shelters, the warming bus is not something that would be...
It was only available in the park. It didn't move. So we want to make sure that when people get to the shelter that they can stay there and receive the wraparound services so they can get into permanent and supportive housing.
Okay. We're speaking with Mayor TIshaura Jones, who's providing a bit of an update on several different topics. One of those that you have just alluded to was traffic violence, insofar as where money is being spent to improve infrastructure. So earlier this fall, we spoke with a St. Louis lawyer and cyclist about traffic violence involving cyclists in particular. And he said he was heartened to hear your October op-ed your October op-ed in the Riverfront Times. But he also voiced frustration over the lack of action being taken to make concrete improvements. So based on your research, what specific improvements and projects need to be prioritized to make traveling city streets safer?
Well, I am not the streets director, so I can't speak to specifics. But what I can speak to is what my administration has done thus far, which we have allocated $40 million for a citywide mobility traffic study, because currently our ward by ward system to address traffic safety in the city clearly is not working. And because, older people have different needs. Some will pay attention to traffic safety, others will not. This needs to be something that is addressed on a citywide basis. And when we do, of course, that's going to take a lot longer than just putting up stop signs and shamo pots and balls in different intersections.
On Twitter, Evie asks, what portion of the $40 million recently promised for pedestrian, cyclist, street safety will go to education and enforcement?
So that $40 million is for infrastructure. We are currently hiring communications directors in the streets department to provide more education. That's a part of the streets department regular budget.
Okay. City government, that is something also that is recent as far as some changes go. And earlier this week, 3 former St. Louis aldermen were sentenced to between 3 and nearly 4 years in federal prison for their roles in a corruption scheme around development incentives. This is a consequence, but why is it that people should believe that government is working for them and isn't corrupt?
Well, our city was shaken by those indictments, and no one wins when we have situations like this. However, I have been and remain committed to making sure that government works for the people, not the other way around. And with the recent election of President Megan Green, I now have a partner in the Board of Aldermen in that office where before I did not. It's been no secret that, Lewis Reed, John Collins Muhammad, and Jeffrey Boyd attacked and challenged me on everything. And that doesn't work when we're arguing with each other, because then things don't get done for the people of the city of St. Louis. I was elected to serve the people, not to serve private interest or whatever. I'm here to do a job to serve the people, and that's what I'm elected to do.
So now that adversarial component is not there, what are 1 or 2 concrete things that will change in St. Louis? And by concrete, I mean things that people sort of in everyday life will be able to see. What are some changes that people in St. Louis will see now that Green is president and you are working together?
Well, for the first time in St. Louis's history, we'll have 3 women represented on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. And women tend to govern in a different way. We think about who's not at the table. We think about families. We lead with compassion. And I'm not saying that men don't, but we just govern different. And we now have a partner between all three offices. We'll have regional collaboration, not only at the city level, but also regionally. So we'll be able to work on things that we agree on. And when we disagree, we'll do it without becoming disagreeable.
Mm-hmm. And do you see there being any opportunity to advance some things that you were interested in pushing forward with when the previous president of the board was there?
Well, guaranteed basic income passed out of HUDs today. I don't think that would have ever happened if we still had those 3 there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very recent development, and it sounds like something that many people have been waiting for. Now, the last thing that we'll touch upon has to do with crime. Mm-hmm. And Tony Messenger has just written a column titled, "Is Gun Safety the Answer to St. Louis Crime?" Lawmakers have made the case again, and that word again is its own sentence. Given what has happened around gun violence, in one word, is there one group of people that you think are really necessary to moving things forward when it comes to dealing with guns?
Yes, the state legislature.
Okay. Well, TIshaura Jones, Mayor of St. Louis, we're so pleased that you were able to join us today. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.